can you just explain how being a White House correspondent actually works? Who's in charge over there? How do you get in that room? Could I go and get a seat in the White House press room if I wanted to? How does that all work?
Right. It's a good question. A lot of people don't understand it because it's not something that people really talk about openly. Because I think the sort of unspoken rule is that if you want to be in on the game, then you don't criticize any of the institutions. I, for whatever reason, have been very critical of the White House Correspondents Association for years and still am a card-carrying member. So
hopefully they won't kick you out for this interview.
Well, if this were what did it, I'd be very surprised. But so basically how I became a White House correspondent credentialed is that when I was working for the Daily Caller, I had a congressional press pass. So I was credentialed through like the Senate press gallery, for example. And typically...
And that is a government institution. That is the United States Senate runs that.
Correct.
Okay.
That's not like a group of elected reporters who decide. That's a government institution. And so that kind of shows that your outlet has passed some kind of background check and screening process to prove that they're legitimate and that they actually cover politics and that the reporters are not, like foreign spies or whatever. So I had that. And then you apply for the White House hard pass. Although you don't necessarily need a hard pass to get in the White House. It just means that you can go every day and swipe in and you don't have to fill out like a special form requesting access. So the hard pass is done through the Secret Service. Basically how that works, from my understanding, is that whatever administration is in power gives you the preliminary yes or no and then passes you along to the Secret Service. And then you can get the hard pass. So you kind of have to already be with a pre-credentialed outlet through Congress in order to get to the White House hard pass. The White House Correspondents Association is...
So do independent journalists not really have a way to break into the system?
Not really.
Okay.
There's a pretty large fence you have to scale in order to even get in. Again...
Does it ever happen?
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Probably if you're like an ally of the administration. But that being said, you can go on a less permanent basis. They have what's called a waives form that you can fill out. And again, if you have some other credential through the government, you can get daily or weekly access. A lot of people do it that way. But it's definitely easier to have a hard pass because then you're not beholden to sending in these requests all the time and getting like special approval. But the WHCA is a separate thing. This is not government run at all. This is a group of reporters who are elected to a bureaucratic organization who then decide basically how access works once you're on the White House campus. So in the briefing room, the seating arrangement that you see is not done by the administration. It's done by the White House Correspondents Association. And every few years, they go back and they revisit the seating chart, and nothing changes a whole lot. Maybe in the back row, they'll throw in a couple of conservatives so that will shut up and go along with the system. But
how did the White House Correspondents Association come about to begin with?
I think it was started in the 70s. And I mean, it was created to address this challenge. Basically, the idea was that they would be independent of politics in determining who gets access to events, because I mean there is inherently a problem if a political administration with political communication staffers was deciding who was allowed to be in press briefings, right? But the problem is the WHCA, because it's old and because most of the people who cover the White House are from outlets that have legacy, have tons of money, because it's expensive to cover the White House. I mean, if you go on a trip with the president, for example, it's like $3,000 right there just to fly on Air Force One with him. So you have, CNN, New York Times, Fox News, Washington Post, Associated Press, McClatchy, Reuters, all of these legacy institutions who are covering the White House on a regular basis for any number of years, the past few decades. So those are the people that tend to get elected to higher positions in the WHCA, and they tend to reward their friends. So the first row in the briefing room is who? CNN, Fox News, NBC News, MSNBC, basically all the TV outlets. The second row, you'll have like the wire services and some of the other mainstream legacy outlets. Third row, you tend to get maybe like some foreign outlets, but for the most part, it's still these mainstream outlets. It's not until you get into the last 2 rows that you'll see anything right of center that's not Wall Street Journal or Fox Fox Biz. And everybody else who doesn't get a permanent seat, I think right now there's only 5 non-corporate conservative outlets who have a permanent seat in the briefing room. And it's like Daily Caller, Washington Examiner. I can't remember if I include Real Clear Politics in that count, but it's not very many. Everybody else has to stand in the aisles. If you stand in the aisle, you're probably not going to get a question from the press secretary. And even if you're sitting in the back in a permanent seat, you're probably not going to get a question because...
How does that work? Like, is it literally just whatever's an eye shot of the White House press secretary, and the kinds of things that tend to be an eye shot are the kinds of outlets they're going to give those questions to anyway? I mean, what are the dynamics of asking questions in the White House press briefing?
It's a combination. So it's definitely about where their eyes are oriented. So being in the front certainly helps. I mean, as it would with any type of press conference. That being said, the press secretary does also typically know who the reporters are, because when a new administration comes in, the reporters will make an effort to set up a meeting with the press secretary. Of course, when you have a liberal administration or a Democratic administration, they're going to be more likely to call on the corporate outlets anyway, because they hate independent and conservative media, because it's a threat to them. So there's all kinds of reasons why Karine Jean-Pierre wouldn't call on me. But even in the Trump administration, I mean, the only time that I would get a question from the aisle, or if I was lucky enough to get a seat, was if I kind of gave the administration a heads up that I was going to be there, and whoever was at the podium knew who I was and was going to call on me because they thought I was going to ask something good or interesting. But it's really a whole game involved in the press briefings. And then the WHCA also controls how access works for departures and arrivals of the president. So if Biden is leaving and going to board Marine One to go somewhere, for example, there's a press scrum that's usually set up there that he goes to talk to. Well, the order that people are allowed to go to the scrum in is also determined by the WHCA, and there's this line system. So how it works is the cameras and photographers and wire services get to go first, then the pool reporters of the day, and then the other outlets. But the other outlets, that system's game too, because you're only allowed to line up a certain time before you go out. I think it's 30 minutes. So if you are someone who has younger staffers with you, you can send someone out to hold your place in line. You can put a stool there or a piece of equipment. And if you're someone like me, you need those 30 minutes to work because you're the only person covering the White House. I don't have a team of 5 people with me where I can send an intern to go waste their time dilly-dallying in the line. Then when you actually go out, all of the cameras are set up. So if you're from an outlet that is a TV outlet, you already have your space saved at the front of the rope because your cameraman's there. So all those people get to line up at the front of the line. Everybody else is in the back, like trying to get over people's heads to ask questions. And if you're 5'4" like I am, that's kind of difficult. So what I used to do is I would either duck under the tall people's elbows and like worm my way to the front, or there were ladders out there for the photographers, and I would climb up like the first 2 rungs of the ladder behind the photographer so that I was tall, and I'd like lean over.
Well, and I would assume that the people who have their like cameras out and stuff, they're rarely picking like Newsmax or like a more conservative outlet. What are some other examples of aside from the seating chart of the WHCA's bias against conservatives and conservative media? One
really great example is what happened to One America News during the COVID pandemic. The Biden administration really locked down press access during that, and I don't know why I do know why there haven't been more complaints about it, but they were really, really shameless. So not only is there still actually a vaccine mandate, like if you don't have a vaccine card that's submitted to the White House communications team, you have to go get a test before you're allowed to get in. And until very recently, the test costs like $150. So again, like a bootstrapped independent outlet is not going to really have the opportunity to go to the White House every day during COVID. And they also limited the number of seats that were in the briefing room. And the only people who kept their permanent seats were, again, the corporate legacy outlets. Everybody else had to rotate through one seat. And I was in that rotation. I got to go once in the span of a year.
Wow.
And the one time I was in there, it was after like a big Hunter Biden story dropped. Nobody asked about it. I was sitting in the back. She cut off questions. Karine Jean-Pierre cut off questions like 2 seats before me. So that whole experience was absolutely ridiculous. It's a little bit better now. They actually let people go into the briefing room. But under the Trump administration, when the WHCA had helped implement all of these rules, someone from the Trump communications team, I don't know who, had apparently personally invited Chanel Rion to come and ask questions. And you guys probably remember she would stand in the back and she would bring her own seat. And the press corps was livid because she had basically found a workaround to their whole little system of keeping people like her out. So they complained that she was violating the social distancing protocols. Then they complained that she was violating the WHCA mandates, and she's a member, so she has to listen to what they say. And she just kept showing up, to her credit. But after that entire situation happened, the WHCA voted to remove One America News as a member in good standing. And to this day, OAN struggles to get White House access because of what the WHCA did. So it was a direct retaliation for her saying, I'm not going to play by your silly little rules just to be able to exercise my First Amendment right as a journalist to ask a question of the White House. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, that's wild. One other piece of this puzzle that is sacred to Washington. Tell us about the White House Correspondents' Ball. Like, what's it actually called?
The dinner.
The dinner. Like this. I mean, it's. I find it fascinating because there's an argument to be made that it got President Trump elected because of that, Joker origin story moment where Barack Obama's making fun of him from stage, and he's like sitting in the audience just like smiling, and like he runs for president a few years later. But what's the social dynamics around that? I mean, do they call it like nerd prom or something stupid like that?
And they have all these after parties that are hosted by like Vanity Fair and NBC News. So I have never been to one. They're kind of expensive. It's, I think, $300 per ticket, maybe $5,000 for a table. And I've never worked for an outlet that's willing to shell out money to go to nerd prom, which is totally fair. And I don't know that I would have much fun at it anyway. But ostensibly, the White House Correspondents' Dinner is a scholarship fundraising event. And the scholarships are for future journalists or whatever, young, like, college-age journalists. And really what it is, it's an opportunity for the reporters to schmooze with government officials and celebrities and feel like they're just as important, and also to build those sort of slimy insider DC relationships, especially the after parties. I think the after parties are an even bigger part of that. But I mean, how it works is basically you buy a table and then you invite a couple of people you really want your outlet to get to know, and they come and they sit at the dinner with you, and then you take them out boozing at the after parties, and it's all about like the greasing of the palms. Yeah. And if you are a liberal reporter getting to attend the dinner during a Republican administration, you know that you're going to get a comedian who's going to give you the opportunity to let out all of your anger and frustration with the administration because you don't like whoever is in power. That's why the Michelle Wolf thing, like all of those journalists secretly loved it. The only reason that they pretended they didn't was because there was major backlash to her comments. Which, by the way, her joke about Kellyanne Conway getting stuck under a tree was much worse than the Sarah Sanders eyeshadow thing, but everyone kind of missed that. And I kind of wonder like what that means about whether or not people actually like Kellyanne. I don't know. I think I've met her once, but you would think people would be more mad about a comedian joking about a tree falling on someone than makeup. But anyway, now they're just boring because the comedians can't really say anything actually funny or true about the administration.
Yeah, they should invite Tucker to come do it one day.
Right. So, I mean, it's kind of silly, but I mean, it's basically just an opportunity again for reporters to kind of feel like they're celebrities and they can rub elbows with people that they want to develop as sources. And there's a pretty gross relationship in general between reporters and the government. I mean, the New York Times is basically a stenographer for the intelligence community at this point. Everybody knows that. And a lot of these outlets get talking points from the DNC or the White House on a daily basis and then go on TV and say them, and then they are rewarded with more access. It's like a circular relationship.